What I want to present to you is work that has been supported wonderfully by Trademark East Africa. But they have allowed us all the freedom to go and research the state of East Africa in 2012. We did one last year, and this one 2013. We have 2 more to come. We looked at the question of inequality. And we discovered, and I'm going to show you, that there isn't one people and one destiny. That's why we put the question mark if you look at the presentation. But there are at least 3 groups of people in East Africa living very different lifestyles. What's the purpose of our State of East Africa report? Number 1, we want to give you information. Tuelewe takwimu. Watu wanasema bila takwimu kaa kimya. Cha pili, drivers and dynamics. Hivi ni kwa nini hii picha tunayoiona tumefikaje hapa? Kuna nini kinachotusukuma tuendelee kama tunavyoendelea? That's the insight. We dig a little bit. Ya tatu tumeita imagination. Kujaribu sasa kuangalia huko mbele. Sio miaka 5 au 10, miaka 20 mpaka 30. Je, tutafananaje? How might this particular issue of ours evolve, and what are the implications for East Africa? And third and fourth and final, we bring it back home. So what do we do about it? How do we engage in the process in order to make sure that that mandate, which our president signed on our behalf, is actually achieved? But I want to highlight a few things. We have the people of East Africa, the economy of East Africa, inequality, that's my main theme, and institutions in East Africa. So, the people, just to give you some data. How many of us are there in East Africa today? 144 million. In a short period of time, there'll be 237 million of us. If you line up all of the Tanzanians, there are 44.9 million of us. Huh? In one line, from the youngest to the oldest. The age of the person right in the middle, the 22nd million, whatever, would be about the age of 16. So half would be below 16, and then half above would be above 16. The youngest country is Uganda. The median age of the middle Ugandan is 15. And the one in Kenya and Rwanda is 19. So we're a young country. We're a young continent. And there are many of us, but most of us are young. More than 3/4 of East Africans are under the age of 35. If you look at Tanzania, you can't see the figure there, but so I put it up here in radio. Just 4.4% of the poorest children in Tanzania are registered at birth. But even the rich ones, the number is just 56%. So where is everybody else? The best ones at registering their children, even amongst the poorest, are the Barundi. 64% of their poorest children are registered at birth. 87% of the rich kids are registered at birth. Uganda, only 44% of children in the highest, wealthiest class register their children. So if you are not registering your children, unawapangia vipi? Shule, makazi, hospitali, clinic. Let's look at the economy. There's many things I could say about the people, but let's look at the economy. We'll come back to discuss. This has been a very exciting region for the past decade and a half. 6% growth, economically speaking, macro. Every year, 6% on average. The Japanese would be salivating. The Japanese have been growing at precisely 0 for the past 20 years. Let's talk about trade. Biashara. Ndio msingi wa utangamano, au sio? Na ndio msingi wa utandawazi pia. Na kama Afrika Mashariki, ukiangalia hizi takwimu, we're very good at business. We went from 37.5 billion in total trade, that's imports plus exports, to almost 46 billion out of an economy of 83 billion. In fact, here's an interesting thing we found. Our fuel bill alone was 8 billion in 2011 to 2012. 8 billion. Our top 5 exports, if you take Tanzania's top 5 exports, Rwanda's top 5 exports, Uganda's, Kenya's, and you add them all together, the total is 7 billion. We can't even pay for our fuel. We'll have to walk in order to integrate across the region if we can't pay for our fuel bill. Foreign direct investment, again, an element of utandawazi. Wale wawekezaji wote wale ambao tunawavutia wanakuja. Na wanaenda wapi? Uganda na Tanzania. Asilimia 90 ya uwekezaji imeenda kwenye nchi hizi mbili. Wanakuja wanawekeza hapa for our own market. Let's look now at some of the inequality of some fundamental things. Education. Tunazungumzia nguvu kazi, rasilimali watu, wanafananaje? Ukiangalia, it's 41% of Burundi's poorest men, not all of them, of the poorest men have not gone to school. But even then, 13% of the men in Burundi in the richest class have not gone to school. Maybe they're doing business. Uganda has the most educated men in the region. They have the lowest proportion of men who have not been to school. Flip the coin, they have the highest proportion of men in East Africa who have gone to school. For women, overall, women struggle to go to school in East Africa. Overall. But 60% of Burundi's poorest women have not been to school. Kila nchi Afrika Mashariki imeweza kutimiza lile lengo la MDGs zile, ya malengo ya milenia ya angalau kuandikisha watoto wao kuingia darasa la kwanza. Utamwandikisha leo, je, kesho ataenda shule? So we've all achieved MDG targets, but quality, my friends, is a big problem. And here are some numbers. As to the quality of education that they receive, number 1, uangalie Tanzania, this is just Tanzania. How many schools have electricity and water and sanitation? What percentage? Even in the urban areas, only 8%. The time spent teaching Tanzanian kids, even when the official amount is lower than Kenya's, the time actually spent teaching Tanzanian children in cities, in urban areas, is 27% of the recommended time. It's slightly better in the rural areas, maybe because I've got nothing else to do, okay? But even there, it's about 37%. The rest of the time, maybe they're fetching water, sweeping, or I don't know what they're doing. Look at the intra-Kenyan difference. Where are my Kenyans? You better send your kids to private school. Why? They get 60 minutes more teaching time than public schools in Kenya per day. 1 hour more. When you look over the course of an academic year, that's 2 months more of schooling. How come it's the privileged in Tanzania? How come it's the Kenyans who are taking all the jobs? This is why. But what was shocking, hapa Tanzania, over this period of 2004 and 2010, everybody ate worse. The prevalence of our children who are stunted, whether rich or poor, increased. Yeah, it increased. For heaven's sake. So why are we hoarding, kwa nini tunahodhi ardhi yetu wakati hata watoto wetu hatuwapi lishe bora? For whom is this land? Let's look at some institutions. The most basic, safety and justice. They are the most corrupt institutions in East Africa. All 5 of our police forces are in the top 10 of the most corrupt institutions. Assessment of their country's current economic conditions. Good to very good is very small and falling. Bad to very bad is very big and rising. Citizens are losing hope in the ability of their government to improve their well-being. If nationally we're doing this kind of thing, can we do it together? Regionally? Perhaps we can. So what's driving this inequality? There are three things, but first I want to show you a picture of inequality here. Wachache ni matajiri, wengi tatizo. Lakini kwa nini? Palmer Index, you take the income of the richest 10% of the population and you divide it by the income of the poorest 40%. Okay? 10%, 40%. The higher that number is, the more unequal is your society. Rwanda is the most unequal country in East Africa. In which year am I looking at? 2011. Rwandans are very good at keeping data. It was the most equal one in 1985. What happened? It went from being the most equal society to being the most unequal society in East Africa, followed by Kenya, then Uganda, then Tanzania, and the most equal country in East Africa is Burundi. But you know something? Burundi is also, economically speaking, the poorest country in East Africa. If we were to take the income of East Africa, uchumi wote wa mwaka 2011, it was $83 billion. This is how the income distribution looks like in each of the countries. So the poor, kule chini, the lowest 20%. Mnawaona? See, some of you have to even stand up. And the richest are up here. So the richest in Kenya, the yellow line, got about $2,000 per year, compared to the lowest were 134. If you were to take that $83 billion in 2011, and you were to divide it according to the share of income, like I showed you, this is what you'd get. The rich, 10%, 14 million of us would take home 35% of all of that income, okay? 3 times our proportion of the population. About 2,100 per annum dollars, let's say $6 a day. The poorest, 40%, 56 million, would go home with almost 50 cents per day. And the middle majority, the middle class, they call them in the newspapers, 71 million East Africans would have about $1.62 per day. Ndio tulio wengi. So this is the inequality in a federal republic of East Africa. So when we integrate, are we trying to deal with this problem here? Or will this problem cause serious problems with our attempts at integration? Why is it like this? Jambo la kwanza, mfumo wa uchumi. Kuna sehemu tatu, si ndio tunasema kilimo, viwanda na huduma. Agriculture, industry and services. It is changing and changing very rapidly. Angalia hapa upande huu graph hii. This is Burundi and its change in the structure of the economy. 7 years ago, agriculture was the biggest contributor to Burundi's economy. 7 years ago. Today, services is the biggest. Sasa, wale wakulima wale, ambao miaka 7 iliyopita ndio walikuwa ndio uti wa mgongo wa uchumi wa Burundi. Leo hii sio wao tena. Sio wao. Lakini hawajapungua kwa idadi. Bado wako pale pale. Na wanaongezeka. Maana yake ni kwamba thamani ya jasho lao inapungua sana. Thamani ya jasho la mkulima Afrika Mashariki inapungua. Japokuwa kwamba wao ni wengi. Kwa hiyo tusishangae kwamba vijana wanakimbia, wanatoka mashambani, wanaenda wapi? Mjini, ambapo labda wakikusumia mkokoteni, si wanakutolea huduma? Wakiosha gari lako pale kwenye parking, si wanakutolea huduma? Kwamba utawapa chochote. Ukiangalia sasa kasi ya ukuaji wa hizo sekta tatu, hiyo line nyekundu ndio hiyo sekta ya huduma. That's the services sector. It's been growing at twice the speed of the agricultural sector. So agricultural sector is growing very slowly. So the people who are working in the agriculture cannot find opportunities in the services industries that gives them enough income to enjoy a decent standard of living. Now, this gap between rich and poor children on the quality of nutrition, it widened in Rwanda. Even though overall the malnutrition fell in Rwanda, the gap widened. It fell faster amongst the rich than the poor. It narrowed in Uganda because it fell faster amongst the poor than the rich. Okay? Tumeelewana? So Uganda was becoming more equal, Rwanda was becoming more unequal on this measure. And this inequality lasts for a generation or two, because you can pass on this to your own children and grandchildren. It narrowed in Kenya and Tanzania for entirely the wrong reasons. In Tanzania, malnutrition went up for the rich, and it went up faster for the poor. So the gap narrowed, but in the wrong direction. Same for Kenya. Where are the malnourished kids? Northern Burundi, East Central Burundi, Dodoma, Iringa, Mbeya, Rukwa, Lindi, lakini Dodoma, 56% of the kids are malnourished in Dodoma, where we have our parliamentarians sitting every year often. Uganda, huko Karamoja. Yeah? So these three places are the worst places for children in East Africa from a nutritional perspective. Final real reason. So the first one, changing structure of the economy, which is leaving a huge chunk of people out. The second one, we are getting a generation of kids who are unable to operate in that service industry one. Sindio? From nguvu za mwili kwenye nguvu za akili. So here's the nguvu za akili. This is the factory that's supposed to produce our well-educated East Africans to operate in the services industry. Okay? Marketing, accounting, financing, these things. The future of East Africa counts a lot on Tanzania. Yeah, but look at the human resource that is supposed to drive that prosperity. The human resource is of this kind of quality. But we looked at the teaching time. Remember I told you, actual teaching time as percentage of scheduled in Tanzania, 27% in the cities, 42% in the rural areas. So what are you sending your children to do? Exactly. Ask yourself that question. Education is a debt that we owe to future generations. It is something that is demanded of us, of future generations. It is not consumption or expenditure. It's an investment. So we have two things that are going to drive the future of inequality in this region. The number one is on this axis that goes like this, across, inclusiveness. How are we including the poorest 40% in the process of generating economic wealth? Are they there? Au tumewacha nje? Tunawatelekeza kabisa. Wale maskini kabisa? Are they included in the process of generating wealth? So that one, high inclusion, huku tunawacha nyuma. Okay, low inclusion. Then up and down is equity. The fairness with which we distribute the fruits of that growth. You saw the growth is not bad, 6% per year. But who is getting it? So we have three stories. Number one, huku. Low inclusion, low fairness, we called it winner takes all. Mwenye nacho, tunasema chukua chako mapema. You take and you leave behind and you don't care about the gap in inequality. The second one, kule chini, where inclusiveness, yani kila mtu anashirikishwa, lakini katika kugawana yale manufaa yale, kidogo, sio sawa. Au wanasema sijui sawa, sawia, sambamba. We call this social bribery. And I want to explain it a little bit, what we mean by social bribery. It's the sense that you are told, kila kata itakuwa na shule ya sekondari. It's the sense that you're told, Maternity will be free. You are told every kid will get a laptop. And you applaud, right? And then you send your kids to these schools and you send your wife to these hospitals. And there's no medicine, there's no blackboard, there's no chalk, there's no desk, there's no electricity to power that laptop. The social bribery in East Africa are the promises that we hear from our leaders. I'm not talking about parties here. I'm also talking about technocrats and business people. Some of it is called corporate social responsibility. Huh? It gives you the impression kwamba umeshirikishwa, si ndio? Umekubali. Lakini ubora wa ile huduma ile ya elimu bure, je, ni sawia na ya wale ambao wanaweza kuilipia? Yeah? It's not. But we accept to be bribed. Soma ilani za vyama, soma all sorts of things. And the data will show you, and they will say, we've increased enrollment by so much. We have built schools. You know, they will argue on the basis of the input, what they have put in there. And it's usually in bricks and mortar and hard things. Not in the soft skills, the teachers, the outcome. The outcome is another issue. Si nimekupa bwana, kama huwezi, ni shauri yako. If you failed, it's your teachers. And for most of us, this is it. But is that equilibrium sustainable? Can we keep doing this? Remember, we're going to be 237 million in 2030. That is your and my lifetime. How many can we keep bribing? What social bribery does is it raises expectations. Matarajio ya Watanzania, Wakenya, Waganda, Wanyana, wa Burundi yanaongezeka kila siku. Na mimi nitapata siku moja, na mimi nitapata. Sawa? Lakini uwezo wa jamii na hasa serikali ya kuyalipia hayo inapungua kila siku. So there's a gap between expectations and the ability to deliver. It's dangerous. The last one, where you are included in the process of generating wealth and it's distributed equitably, we're calling transformation. Growth with reducing inequality. Social bribery, the promise. I promise you the world and 2 moons. The reality, najua bwana, wakati mgumu, wafadhili hawapo tena, we have to cut down, so no more free education, we have to cut down on laptops, but you understand, don't you, that we have no resources? And choices have consequences. So, but the choice was double. They promised us, we accepted, now we have to share the burden of disappointment. And transformation, where the economic policy goes from export competitiveness. East Africa must export. We must raise the value of our exports to feed somebody else or to, clothe and jewel somebody else, to looking in an inward orientation, to growing domestic demand. So what is the discourse? Yani mazungumzo yetu katika hili jambo lote la maendeleo, sio utangamano tu, lakini maendeleo dunia nzima. Hiyo future ya chukua chako mapema hiyo. Ndio hali halisi, si ndio? Ndio hali halisi. Kila mtu anajitafutia, ajihodhie yeye mwenyewe, ajitajirishe yeye mwenyewe na familia na kundi lake. Sisi kama asasi za kiraia ndio tumeweka jitihada zote zetu pale kwa sababu tunadai haki. Ni haki yangu bwana. Ni haki mtoto aende shule. Ndio, sawa, lakini anasoma. Ni haki ya kina mama wapate huduma bure. Ndio, sawa. Nenda hospitali basi. Hakuna. Lakini sisi kelele tunayopiga, naomba mniwie radhi. Ni kwenye hizo haki. You demanded the input, you did not look at the outcome. Right? You demanded more resources for this, you did not look at the outcome and the delivery mechanism for that. Our job must be, if we want to put more money in the poorest people's pockets, is to make sure that they are well integrated in the economic process. Raise domestic demand. The more money you put in people's pockets, the more they will demand their own fellows' products. We create kids, young people who are skilled and competitive, and then you level the playing field so that everybody has equal chance. And you increase value addition. You see that picture? Who is that? Azam, who buys local fruits and packages them and sells them across the region. Big impact on the local economy. And strong regional integration. Social policy, higher. This is my challenge to you. When governments promise you the moon because we have found gas in this country, mkiwashangilia, kidogo, kuna tatizo. Or we can say, but you know, resource curse, itakuja kutunani hii. Yes, but let's manage the expectations. Let's understand what it costs to improve quality. We say, school for everybody. Yes, everybody can go to school and learn precisely zero. So what is the trade-off? And this is a very difficult conversation. Tunachagua lipi kati ya kila mtu apate elimu na wachache wapate elimu bora. We have a thing called ballot box democracy. And people who feel kwamba kwa sababu nimepiga kura, basi nimeshafaniza mchango wangu katika hii nani ya mchakato wa demokrasia. Hafu nahongwa na pilau na kanga mbili. Ndio hapo. Nimefanya wajibu wangu wa kidemokrasia. Should our governments decide and execute an economic agenda which leads to development, a bit like the Malaysians and the South Koreans and who is the other ones? The Taiwanese. Or should we do soko huria, unawakaribisha wawekezaji, hata wandani, by the way, alafu unawachia wafanye wanachotaka. Akiona kwamba hamna faida hapa, anafunga, anaondoka. So the principle of subsidiarity suggests kwamba the center is subsidiary to the district. Do you understand that? That your ministers are subsidiary to you. You're turning this upside down, right? It suggests that the authority to execute must be taken to the very lowest level where it can be most effective. Let's go back to Dar es Salaam in James Bond's car. And this is Dar es Salaam. And that car, like I said, costs $280,000. It can go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in less than 5 seconds. It guzzles gas. It goes 5 kilometers per liter of petrol. Have I not just described East Africa? And it's stuck in traffic, okay? That's East Africa for you. Huge potential, huge. Stuck in a traffic jam. And outside or inside, our fellow citizens are looking into that potential and seeing a bright future and hoping that they too can be inside there. Beautiful air-conditioned car. A well-functioning, prosperous, growing East Africa. We're all looking inside. But the drivers squabble. That young man in the orange is very pragmatic. He's my favorite East African. He sees the problem, traffic jam, anashuka, anatembea. With his 2 feet, he will get to where he needs to get to before the James Bond car. Yeah? Won't he? But are we doomed to this? I think not. And the solutions are there, and some of them are already happening. How do you equalize this situation? How do you unclog the traffic jams? How do you include everybody in the process of generating wealth? How do you make sure that everybody is treated equitably in the distribution of those benefits of growth? What do? You build a bus rapid transit, right? So everybody goes into these comfortable buses. They pay an affordable amount of money, and you get rid of traffic jams, whether you're rich or poor. But this is an investment that is deliberate by our governments. It's not a private sector project. It is a deliberate act of government to make things more equal and more efficient. In Kenya, they put Syokimau. It's losing money, but so what? It's losing 50 million shillings a month, but so what? People can ride on that train from wherever it goes into the center of town, no traffic hassles, affordable for most. And there you've reduced some element of inequality. And this is the job, isn't it? This is the whole point of regional integration, is to make sure that that boy with the malapa in the back of the pocket has a hope that his life in the future will be better. But also that that person driving that Mercedes-Benz or whatever it is, it's called Aston Martin, the James Bond car, feels tied, connected to the boy outside looking in. And this is when you get real, true regional integration that improves the lives of every citizen.